4.10. The pound buys $1.22 and €1.15. LBC weather, rain moving in from the west tonight, drier in the southeast with a low of -2. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello and welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. I think I'm going to have a swear box in this hour that every time I say Queen's Speech instead of King's Speech, I think it's happened at least 6 times so far, I have to put some money into it. Corey reckoned £1,000 a time. He would, wouldn't he? Now, let me tell you who's on our panel today. To my right, Matthew Dancona, editor-at-large at the New European newspaper. He co-hosts the Two Mats podcast. We'll talk a bit about that later. Angela Epstein is journalist and broadcaster. Heather Wheeler, Conservative MP for South Derbyshire, and Barry Gardiner, Labour MP for Brent North, who's a former member of the Shadow Cabinet under Jeremy Corbyn. 0345 6060 973. If you'd like to put a question to our panel, you can text 84850 or say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, if you'd like to watch us rather than just listen to our dulcet tones, you can do so on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first question. It's from James in Chelsea. Hi, James.
Hi, good evening, panel. In King's speech today, there was a lot of talk about law and order and different things coming in. And I just want to ask the panel, I think it's going to take between 12 months and 18 months. And by then we would have had an election, general election. And is it just, I don't know, is it just more distraction tactics just to sort of take away from where the Conservative Party is and where it's at and what it's going through at the moment?
OK, let's go to Conservative MP Heather Wheeler.
Well, thank you very much for the question, James. I certainly hope not. Certainly a number of the items that Alex Chalk, the Lord Justice, will take through appeal to voters in South Derbyshire. So I want them on the statute book, and I hope that we've all learnt our lesson and that we keep bills as brief as possible and we actually get them through the system as quickly as possible. So that's my plea for the people behind the scenes who actually physically write the bills.
And what's this bill supposed to achieve?
3 things that come to mind straight away. The idea that as a convicted person, you refuse to come out of your prison cell and go into the dock to hear the prison sentence that you get.
Because that needs legislation?
Apparently it does. So that's number 1. Number 2, people like convicted rapists, convicted murderers to actually serve their whole sentence. Again, apparently that needs legislation. So that's a nice quick one I think we could do. And there's a third one where we're talking about where you are refusing to say where you've left the body of the person you've murdered. You've admitted to murdering them, but you won't tell the family where that you've left them. So I think, again, that one could be a quick bill as well.
I think a lot of people will be in favour of longer sentences for people who commit really serious crimes. But, of course, there's got to be the prison places for them
Indeed.
to serve their sentence in. And it seems to me the other side of this is not being addressed, that if you're going to free up prison places, you've got to send fewer people to prison for sort of lighter crimes. That wasn't mentioned at all.
No, we've had a prison building programme and we need to get smart with making sure the right people are in the right prisons at the right time. Certainly when it comes to prisoners who are going to come out, and it's about rehabilitation as well, that we get them into the lower category prisons at the right time, and also the open prisons, so that they're going out to work and they are rehabilitating. And so we want to have a smoother passage for those people.
Barry Gardiner.
Look, I think you've got to reckon that 90% of all crimes now are going unsolved. And that means that since 2010, actually half as many crimes are being solved as they were in 2010. I welcome longer sentences for rapists, for child sexual abusers, for theft and burglary. But you know very well, and Heather knows this as well, that only 2% of rapists receive a court summons. People, the actual processing of these, 2/3 of all child abuse cases are closed because of what the police call evidential difficulties. So it's one thing to say, we're going to have tougher sentencing. Let's get them into court in the first place, prosecute them, make sure they are then convicted of the crimes they've committed. Then we can talk about sentencing. But, to do it the other way around, I'm afraid is really window dressing.
I suppose you could say it's a deterrent.
But it's not, Iain, and that's the trouble. As I say, if you look at violent offences, it's not a deterrent. If you look at rapes and the way in which many are from people that are known to the person, this is not something that is actually deterring people. We actually need, I think, wide scale. And I welcome Alex Chalk's moves to actually have a building programme for prisons. And that came in the last Parliament. I think it was very welcome, much needed. But if you look at what's happening actually in the conviction rates, that is what is really troubling. We are not getting the criminals convicted.
Angela Epstein.
Well, I just think, first of all, I'm very glad to hear that Rishi Sunak is sort of positioning himself from such a platform of optimism, because if he was sort of approaching the King's Speech and therefore the whole legislative package that goes with it from a position of, well, we're going to lose, what's the point? He could say, well, everybody gets a free Mars bar next week. I mean, he could say anything.
That's got my vote.
Yeah, okay. I don't like that. I find him a bit too stickily sweet. Anyway, but that's by the by. Look, top class political observation here. But all joking aside, I think crime, I think home security, I think feeling safe is a very, very important and prevailing preoccupation for people of whatever political flavour, whatever their political complexion is. We've seen now, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about it this evening, lots of concern about the riots that have been going on in the name of so-called peaceful protests, whether the police are doing enough to arrest those who are breaking the law, whether the CPS are then progressing with those who they deem to be fit to be charged because they've met the threshold, the criminal threshold. And I think we need to have a Prime Minister who is, whatever the time span, who has a robust enough stance to say enough is enough where crime is concerned. And it's very easy to say, well, we're doing it the wrong way around. You listen to somebody like Olivia Pratt-Cobell's mother on the telly this evening. I saw her just before I came out. Devastating loss of her daughter. And the man who was convicted of that awful murder refused to come to court for sentencing. How dare he? How dare he be in a position to choose whether he should be there to listen to justice being, affected as a consequence of his heinous crime? So, of course, these things need to be done. And the final thing I would say is, yes, look, this King's Speech was doing three things. It was saying, we're still good to go. We're drawing a dividing line between Conservatives and Labour, and this is our manifesto if you elect us for another term. So I know there's all that's wrapped up in it. I mean, even at times King Charles looked a bit kind of sceptical about some of it. But the point is, we need to have a position of optimism. We need hope. And I think he gave us some hope in that regard.
See, that's interesting, because I think the direct opposite of that. I thought it was the sort of most, I don't know, depressing King's Speech that we've ever. I can't imagine
70 years.
Margaret Thatcher's. Well, but compared to Queen's speeches, I can't imagine Matthew D'Ancona, Margaret Thatcher's last Queen's Speech in sort of before the 83 election or before the 87 election was as boring and mediocre as this one.
Well, one has to acknowledge, I mean, it was a historic moment because, as you've implied, it's the first speech by a king for 70 years, and also a king who'd been Prince of Wales for a long time, so we know a lot about his views. And I think his delivery, it isn't treasonous to say, was somewhat downbeat. He looked like, how many bills were there? 16? He looked like he was chewing 16 wasps. Or signing 21, or signing an NDA, or announcing very disappointing exam results at school, and so
or reading the phone book.
That's kind of what he was doing. Actually,
when he was announcing the rollback on net zero, you didn't have to be a psychologist to see what he was thinking. The longing for subtitles was great. But, my general feeling is that you're right, Ian, that Margaret Thatcher would probably have gone hell for leather a bit more. But it's also true that King's speeches and formerly Queen's speeches were never, terribly seismic events. They were, by definition, lists of policies delivered in a very straightforward way, for all the pomp and circumstance of the event. And boy, the pageantry is amazing. This is the latest in a series of instalments in Rishi Sunak's bid to defy political gravity and win or be the largest single party in next year's election. He started with the speech he gave on net zero. Then there was the party conference speech. And then on November 22nd, we'll have the autumn statement. They're a package, and they have to be considered as a package. And, it is the key is he has to get the electorate to hear him talking about long-term decisions without laughing.
And a brighter future.
And, a brighter future, but not necessarily involving him. So, this is a very, very big challenge, to put it mildly. But do I think today specifically advanced his chances? No, I don't. But it's part of a, last ditch. There are no Prime Minister has had more, last chance saloons in my memory. And this was another one. And there'll be another one with the autumn statement.
Do you think he's a political animal with a small p? Because that's, in a sense, what the Conservative Party surely needs over the next year.
The problem was that 2022 was an absolutely calamitous year for the Conservative Party. It had two sort of, in their different ways, shall we say, swashbuckling prime ministers who were different from the norm in Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And after that, they decided they wanted a technocrat in Rishi Sunak, having tried the alternative. And the fact is that Rishi Sunak is, he is Mr. Spreadsheet. He is, the pulse does not quicken. And I know people say, what the public really wants is a boring prime minister. I don't believe that for a minute, actually. I think the public likes to be inspired. And you can be sound on policy and come up with great ideas and speak to people's concerns without being dull. And, he is not a natural communicator in the model of a Blair or a Heseltine or a Thatcher. He just isn't. That's not his forte.
But surely, if they really believed in this King's speech, Heather Wheeler, they should have had senior cabinet ministers fanning out across the media, explaining to us all how brilliant this is. Now, we asked for a minister to come on the programme tonight. None was provided. Now, Lucy Fraser was on Andrew Marr. Alex Burkhart was on Tom Swarbrick, but with respect, nobody's heard of Alex Burkhart. Where's the rest of the cabinet? Because I always say to them, if you don't explain your policies through the media, who do you think is going to do it for you?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry that you've ended up with me, obviously.
No, not at all. We're very
Lucky
delighted
us.
to have you.
Yeah, we're dead happy to have you.
Well, yeah, very kind. So I don't know why they've not put ministers out. That seems very strange. I can't assume that they all got just a little bit too merry at lunchtime.
But Lucy Fraser's been doing the round of the media this evening, and she's also doing it tomorrow morning. And you think, well, they've got other people that are good on the media, like your friend of mine, Penny Mordaunt. Why don't they use her?
That's a very interesting conversation. I think perhaps as leader of the House, I'm not so sure it's her role to do that. But
it absolutely is.
I'll go back and discuss it with her. But it is interesting that they're using Lucy tonight and tomorrow because, one of the three of the bills are digital stuff, media stuff. So that makes sense for Lucy to do that. But I find those bills a bit difficult. I think what they're doing is absolutely right. But
the very mention of the letters AI, and I just switch off.
Yeah, well,
somebody else could switch on for you, though, couldn't they?
Yeah, right, we will move on to a very interesting question for Martin in Doncaster in a couple of minutes' time. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
We have with us Matthew Dancona, Editor-at-Large of the New European, Angela Epstein, journalist and broadcaster, Heather Wheeler, Conservative MP for South Derbyshire, and Barry Gardiner, Labour MP for Brent North. Now, before we get to our next question, let's talk about podcasts, because Heather has never listened to a podcast, but she has heard of your podcast, Angela, which you've just told me has the wonderful title of The Jewish Mother Me Podcast.
Yes. Now, can I just say this is not a parenting podcast. If you are having trouble with tricky toddlers or kids that won't sleep through the night, please move on, because this is not what we do. We're looking at the character of the Jewish mother through the prism of personal experience, people who've experienced Jewish mothers, grandmothers, or have known them. We ask well-known people who've had Jewish mothers or have them, like Howard Jacobson or Graham Gouldman or Nicola Schindler, television producer, or ordinary people who have extraordinary stories, because there is the caricature of the Jewish mother. You know, she'll feed you till you're sick. She will love you till you can't breathe. She will protect you like a lioness. But also she cares and she has wisdom. Look, there's lots of women like that. It's not just Jewish mothers, but there is something about that psyche that has kind of been collectively labelled as Jewish mother syndrome. So we just want to do something uplifting and wise, not us personally, but the people that listen to us. And we're three very different Jewish mothers who've been mothered by three different Jewish mothers. I mean, I'm a journalist, one of us is a dentist, and one is an ex-doctor who's now a Holocaust educator. So we come together with lots of different experiences, but it's not about us, it's the experiences of others that we listen to.
We could talk for hours about this. I'm tempted to say, what's the difference between a Jewish mother and a Muslim mother? But then people will expect a punchline.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, no, there is. I mean, there's the classic Jewish joke is the Jewish grandmother walking along with two little kids, and somebody says, "Oh, how old are they?" And she says, "The doctor's 4 and the lawyer's 6."
But you could say that about a Muslim mother as well.
You could say it about any mother, because often women and men, obviously it's in the DNA to kind of be overprotective, overambitious. It's nothing, particular. But
now, Matt, your podcast is called The Two Matts. It's you and Matt Kelly, who's the founder of the New European newspaper. What do you do?
Well, we do. I mean, we had to really. When I joined the New European earlier this year. It just seemed it would be crazy not to take advantage of the fact that we had the same name. And we also found a producer called Matt. So the whole thing is getting out of hand.
Are all the listeners called Matt?
I don't... We need to do some demographic research on this, but probably. As you'd expect, given that it's an offshoot of the New European, it's very much concerned with the aftermath of Brexit, but also there's a lot of culture in it, and there's a lot about rising nationalism, not only in this country but across the world, but we try very hard not to make it too earnest. I mean, I think that the podcast genre lends itself to informality and to that kind of you're bidding for people's time when they're on the tube or on a run or something like that. So it has to have an element of lightness.
And you're very different characters as well. I mean, Matt's a Scouser, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. I mean, he's the serious one, really. Though I mean,
is
I
he?
think no. We someone said we were the Derek and Clive of centrist dads the other day, which I think was meant as a compliment. But no, we have a great time, and we're only on episode 20, and we've just started doing two a week.
Well, we are on For the Many 6 years old this week. I mean, 433 episodes.
You are Yoda, really, when it comes to political podcasting, Ian. You really are.
I wish I knew what that meant, but anyway.
You know perfectly.
I laughed knowingly.
Right,
but
let's go to Martin in Doncaster, who has a great question. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Ian and panel. Yeah, Bob Seeley called Suella Braverman a decent Home Secretary. Is he right?
Now, Bob Seeley is a Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight. He said this on Politics Live yesterday, following the Home Secretary's claim that rough sleeping can be a lifestyle choice. Well, Suella Braverman certainly has a knack of getting the headlines, Matt Dancona, but does that make her a decent Home Secretary?
This is some definition of the word decent that I've obviously missed. Suella Braverman is kind of a rogue agent, but very much permitted by Number 10. It's really important to remember that she secured the premiership for Rishi Sunak in October do you remember that weird weekend when Boris Johnson was going to come back and run for the leadership? And Suella Braverman popped up, and very few days after she had her first stint as Home Secretary, and said, actually, Rishi's the man for me. And that ended the debate over Boris Johnson, and Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. And she has said a lot of things that I think Rishi Sunak agrees with, particularly around Rwanda, small boats and everything, in language he would never use, but which suits him. Now, I think that probably with this absurd idea that people who are rough sleeping in tents are doing it as a lifestyle choice, she jumped the shark. And, Number 10 was pretty horrified, and you'll notice that proposal was conspicuous by its absence in the King's speech. And they're not happy. But this idea that she's going to be sacked in what we assume is a forthcoming reshuffle, I am not sure about that. I think that she'd be too dangerous on the backbenches, and also she still performs a function for the Rishi Sunak operation.
Does she really have any following, though?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, I don't think she would win in a leadership contest, personally. I think, for example, Kemi Badenoch is more popular, but also speaks to the right with her kind of anti-woke, strong, robust politics, but perhaps in a less, occasionally deranged way. I mean, Kemi Badenoch would never say that the people out on the embankment in tents are doing it, as sort of decision given to them by a life coach. And I think that was a very odd thing. And also it shows how influenced Suella Braverman is by American politics. She's very much MAGA UK. This is the kind of thing that you'd expect, the Trumpites to say.
Angela.
I think she's fantastic. Next. I think what she
Elaborate.
said... Okay.
You stunned me into silence.
Sorry, I just need to pat Matt's brow if I'm allowed to. No, in all seriousness, I think what she said about sleeping by the Thames was absolutely regrettable, and if she meant otherwise, and I'm not here to give her the benefit of the doubt, she can speak for herself, and meant some people are trying to swing the system or whatever, it's a really extreme way of doing it, then she should have said so. She's not perfect, and that was a very imperfect thing to say. Before that, I would have said that she is, to nick your word, Matt, she is a robust Home Secretary. What do I want from a Home Secretary? I want somebody who absolutely speaks the language of law and order, who I believe has the kind of ideas that will, if brought into effect, will give me the best chance of feeling protected in this country. I think she's been very steadfast, for example, and it's very personal to me, over the rise of anti-Semitism, her support for the Community Security Trust and the extra money that's been given to support Jewish communities. Our children go to school behind barbed wire with guards on the door, which is a ridiculous concept, but we do. But it's not just about my own backyard. I just think, given spiralling crime, and I know our prisons are oversubscribed, I don't want a weak, mealy-mouthed Home Secretary. I want a table thumper who says it as it is. I think it's such an important office of state. And yes, the problem is that sometimes, her choice of language is highly regrettable, to say the least, certainly as a
hurricane of illegal immigrants. Is that helpful?
I think that, again, what she was trying to do was address the problem of the small boats. Every day, people are being exploited by these evil traffickers in order to get across the water. But the way that she expressed herself was absolutely awful, absolutely terrible. But I think she is appealing to, underneath all that, a centre-right conservatism that believes in the need for security and safety within the home and law and order. And I need somebody as a Home Secretary to say that, albeit in maybe a slightly less contentious way.
Heather Wheeler, I mean, you call a spade, but I can't imagine that you would have made the kind of crass errors that she has.
It is unfortunate about the lifestyle choice phrase, because the really infuriating thing is there is no reason why anybody should be sleeping on the streets in this country. We put £2 billion into sorting out rough sleeping. It's actually come down by 20%. We want to halve it in the next 3 years. So that was our pledge. And I mean, I really feel this very, very keenly. There is no reason, but what we really understand is there are unbelievably complex cases here. There are some people who maybe have PTSD or maybe have a drug dependency or alcohol dependency, and they don't want to go somewhere where they've got to follow rules because they don't necessarily feel that they're ready to take the help that's on offer to them.
But is she a decent Home Secretary, as your colleague Bob Seeley says?
I go back to the Theresa May days of Home Secretary, and when I first came into politics 100 years ago, I never wanted to be Prime Minister, but I did want to be Home Secretary. And I thought the attrition that being Home Secretary for 10 years for Theresa May, I probably don't want to be Home Secretary now. So I think it's a real poison chalice. I really do.
Barry Gardiner, are you one of these people that Suella Braverman makes you hanker after Priti Patel?
Look, you said you want someone who speaks the language of law and order. I don't. I want somebody who delivers. Since 2015, there's been a 60% rise in serious violence. There's been a 70% rise in recorded knife crime. Offences under £200 for shoplifting are now rarely prosecuted. I want somebody who delivers, not who talks a good game. If you want to talk about homelessness, then I would urge you to listen to the interview that an old friend of this programme, Matthew Torbett, did earlier, I think it was earlier today or maybe yesterday, on geopolitics. He's somebody who was street homeless. He's somebody who had family problems, who was thrown out of his family at, I think it was the age of 15 or 16, found himself on the streets. He talks about it with such understanding, with such moving compassion. And he explains why people who are street homeless don't want to go into hostels because they think their stuff's going to get nicked. And he explains the ways in which homelessness breaks down and the importance of trying to break the cycle, but how complicated it is. So, no, I don't want somebody who speaks the language. I want somebody who actually understands what law is and doesn't go to the United Nations.
Which is a former Attorney General.
And doesn't go to the United Nations and undermine international law in the way that she did, make this country a laughingstock. Actually, not a laughingstock. Actually, people were looking at us, not laughing at us, but thinking, my God, has the UK descended to this?
Does that mean that...
That means that I don't believe that Bob Seeley is correct. I don't believe that she's a decent Home Secretary. I'd go with Heather, you see. I actually think Theresa May, and look, I disagreed with many of her policies, but Theresa May was is a really decent woman who did a really decent job as Home Secretary. Lots of policies I disagreed with, but fundamentally, she was a decent person trying to do the best.
Quickly, Angela, quickly, Heather.
All I was going to say was you've got a Labour mayor who's overseeing a city that has got spiralling knife crime. You've obviously got a Labour mayor who isn't delivering there. So I'm just wondering how you reconcile that with what you've just said.
Let's leave that question hanging, Heather.
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to bring in an element of that. So we have police and crime commissioners. Police and crime commissioners set the priorities for an area. In Derbyshire, we have as a priority arresting people who are shoplifters, and we send them to court and they get the full sentence that they should get. It's a priority with my police and crime commissioner in Derbyshire to do that. So it's actually up to the police and crime commissioners. So don't say it doesn't happen for 200 hours, whatever it is. If it's not worth more than 200 quid, we're not going to do anything. That's down to the police and crime commissioner in that area. So whether it's Sadiq Khan or whoever, in Derbyshire, we get it done.
OK, let's all go and live in Derbyshire, I say. 8:32 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
Israel's Prime Minister says his country's military has the leader of Hamas surrounded in a bunker in Gaza. Ministers here have been meeting to discuss how the ongoing conflict may impact the UK. A 15-year-old boy has died after being stabbed near a school in Leeds. It happened in the area of Horsforth shortly before 3 this afternoon. A teenager has been arrested. And the Prime Minister has promised a brighter future for Britain after today's King's speech. But Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer claims the government's priorities for this new session of Parliament is just more of the same. LBC weather, windy tomorrow with rain spreading east, brighter for most by the afternoon with some blustery showers in the northwest, a high of 13.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:36. Great panel tonight. Matthew Dancona, Angela Epstein, Heather Wheeler and Barry Gardiner are with us. Luke is in Orpington. Luke, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, Iain, and good evening, panel. My question is this. It's thought that perhaps twice as many people will be acknowledging Remembrance Sunday or acknowledging the weekend at some point, service or something. My question is, will I and my family be safe travelling to London to remember Armistice Day?
Yes.
Well, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, says he will not be asking the Home Secretary to ban Saturday's pro-Palestinian march, as he doesn't believe it currently presents enough of a threat to public safety to do so. That's despite Tommy Robinson telling his supporters to join him in central London this Saturday. It should be pointed out that the march is planned for Saturday, not Sunday. They say they're going nowhere near the Cenotaph or Whitehall. And on LBC earlier, Winston Churchill's grandson Nicholas Soames told Andrew Marr that the march must be allowed to go ahead because a lot of people died during the war to assert freedom. Angela, let's start with you.
Okay, well, look, the right to peaceful protest is enshrined in law. It's the very liberty that those who had the, gave the ultimate sacrifice died for. That's understood, and I think, and I would absolutely endorse that. The problem has been with the pro-Palestinian marches is they have been more than the expression of peaceful protest in certain quarters. There are plenty of law-abiding people who have their own views about Gaza and the political situation in the Middle East, to which they're entirely, they're entitled to express, and they should express. That's what we do in a free society. However, the degree of anti-Semitic tropes, there's some really heinous things that have been shouted out. We've seen poppy sellers surrounded and clearly intimidated. A veteran was roughed up in Scotland. This is not peaceful protest. And what it's doing is, we talk about respect. It's disrespecting the very people who have gifted those who have the liberty to protest. It's absolutely disrespecting the sacrifice that they made. Now, anti-Semitism is spiralling in the UK. I was in Israel when the attacks happened and came back so called because, my children said, come home. I was visiting friends and family, and I was actually writing a travel piece, ironically, for a national newspaper. And they said, come home, it's not safe there. I'm not over sort of egging the pudding here or catastrophizing by saying there have been times over the last week where I felt safer there than here, which is and I'm a very proud British citizen. My grandfather came at the turn of the century, insisted on being naturalised, and fought in the First World War because he was so grateful for the sanctuary Britain gave him as a Jewish man escaping persecution. So I think it is down to Mark Rowley. I hope he makes a good call on this one. I would say that given the atmosphere, given the spiralling anti-Semitism, given Tommy Robinson then throwing in his oar, battle lines are being drawn, and we are forgetting the very nature of what Remembrance Sunday, I know it's the following day, represents. So all I can do is personally plead with those who are organising the march on both sides to keep it peaceful. It's regrettable they're choosing that day. I would rather they kept away from the Remembrance weekend. I really would. I think it's deliberately strategic to do that.
Well, they have been doing it every Saturday. So.
But there are so many other Saturdays in a year. There's 50 odd Saturdays in a year. They could miss it this weekend, just this one weekend. Unfortunately, I hate calling it the conflict in Gaza. It was triggered by Hamas's brutal massacre of innocent people and the misery they've unleashed on the people of Gaza as well. That's unleashed this situation. It's going to go on. It's not going to be a short-term conflict. Do it some other time. Okay. But we can't stop them because that's what a free society is all about.
Barry Gardiner.
I agree with what Angela's just last said, and that is, it is what a free society is all about. It's about coping with people who have differing views. And look, I have the largest Jewish school in Europe in my constituency, and I also have a very large Muslim population in my constituency. I'm pleased to say that there was no interruption to those children going to school. They wore their blazers with pride, their uniform with pride. And they were protected in doing so. I'm pleased to say that we have good relations, community relations. But I recognise that anti-Semitism is on the rise. I recognise that Islamophobia is on the rise. And what we have to stop in this country is importing the disputes around the world and allowing them to ruin the very good race relations that we have in this country. Of course, and I agree with all that Angela said about October the 7th. It was a vile terrorist attack. I also understand that people in this country who were horrified by that are equally horrified by the bombing that is happening and the way in which Gaza seems to be pounded at the moment. And, you know, it is not the wrong thing for decent people who want to see an end to conflict on the Saturday before we recall Armistice Day, which put an end to conflict in the First World War, to say, look, we want to see an end to conflict here as well. Now, I'm sure Angela and I will disagree about ceasefires or humanitarian
I'm agitated by the moral equivalence between Israeli reprisals when they are targeting, they inform people of moving south, they drop leaflets.
Let's not go into the whole...
No, we won't, but what I'm saying is it disturbs me.
I did not talk about moral equivalence. That was your phrase. What I said, and I actually would agree with you, that Hamas deliberately uses its own innocent people as a human shield for their military installations. But one can't, in this conflict, one can't say, well, it all started on October the 7th. There's a whole history here, and it goes back and back and back. And everybody will use a baseline that is convenient for them. The point is, how do we move forward? We're not going to move forward unless there is dialogue. I'm a former Northern Ireland minister. I know that only too well. No matter how offensive, no matter how wrong you find the people on the other side, ultimately, if you want to have peace, you have to talk.
Okay. Well, we're straying off the question here. Matthew?
Well, I've been really seriously troubled by a lot of the things I've seen on the marches over the last weekends. The use of the chant "From the river to the sea," which, if it means anything, means the annihilation of the state of Israel. The use of the chant "Jihad" by Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is a fundamentalist organisation prescribed elsewhere, and really offensive placards like the one I've seen more than once where the Star of David is being put in a waste bin. And I think that there is a serious point of issue between the government and the police over where the line lies on what should and shouldn't be prevented, and in some cases the cause of arrest and prosecution, and that needs to be resolved quickly because this is clearly going to go on. However, it seems to me that the problem is, if you believe in the right to freedom of assembly, it's precisely the marches that you have qualms about that you have to allow. It's precisely when you have doubts and reservations that you have to check yourself and say, no, this is the price of a democratic society. And I think it's really important to remember that on October the 7th, which is a day one can't go back to often enough, Hamas was trying to do many things. The first it was trying to do was just to find as many Jews as it could and kill them in as many and as brutal ways as it possibly could. That was mission number one. But another mission was to sort of spray psychological shrapnel all over the world and into countries that are historically allies of Israel, such as this one, and to make us in our rage compromise our values a little bit and to shred our liberties just a little bit. And I don't want to give that lot that satisfaction, which is why, with certain reservations and doubts, I want the march to go ahead on Saturday.
Heather?
I think that's a beautifully put reason why it should happen. I'm still at the point where it shouldn't happen. I don't think the police can guarantee complete safety of anybody around the areas where those marches are going to go. although we're all talking about Remembrance Sunday, Saturday is Armistice Day. It's the 11th hour on the 11th minute of the 11th day. That is the most important day. We celebrate the Sunday because everybody is available on the Sunday. That's why we do the Sunday. But it's always the 11th hour of the 11th day. And I know I will be doing a remembrance event on the 11th hour in my main town on the Saturday, and then the march on the Sunday.
But if the march isn't going anywhere near the cenotaph, why are you so anxious about it?
Because I just think there are going to be hotheads, and there are going to be people going off, and it's going to be those splinter groups that are going to go off and cause absolute mayhem. I mean, they took the flags off the cenotaph this week because they couldn't guarantee that we wouldn't have the lunatics swinging on them or whatever it was going to be. And
They said they were
taking off for
them.
cleaning. Yeah, great.
But these marches have been a magnet for. I mean, I think you're being kind when you say hotheads, if you don't mind me saying so, Heather, because one of the great advantages for the so-called extreme Palestinian cause or the pro-Hamas cause is ignorance of the history. When you talk about it went on long before October the 7th, we cannot say that in a civilised society. We have to draw a line on October the 7th and say it was a massacre. It doesn't matter what, we can't say it was a massacre, but we have to get rid of the word
Well,
but.
again, we're
and
going
that's why I'm
way
sort
off
of going
the
back
question.
to way.
Barry, final word from you.
Look, I think if you're protesting, if you're trying to make a point, then you should try and bring the public with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the reality of the situation is that the British public is probably not with the protests going ahead. I believe, for all the reasons Matthew has said, I believe it is about freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and I think it's right that it should be allowed. But I think if the organisers had any sense, what they would do is they would say, you know what? We're pissing off a lot of people here. That's not going to do the cause any good that we support. Therefore, actually, strategically, why don't we call it a halt here and come back next week?
Yep.
Anyone who's offended by Barry's swear word there, apologies. We're not at 9 o'clock, Barry, yet. Right, we are going to take a short break, and then we'll be back with another question on housing. It's 8:48.
LBC Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Matthew Dancona, Angela Epstein, Heather Wheeler and Barry Gardiner answering your questions. Here's one, a text question from Trish in Ellesmere Port. Does allowing people who already own their own homes to effectively buy up the lease on that home really do anything to solve the housing crisis? Now, in the plans in today's King's Speech, leaseholders will be able to increase their existing lease by 990 years rather than the current maximum of 90 years, while newly built houses will not be allowed to be leasehold properties. New flats will still be able to be built with leases. Heather Wheeler, you were Housing Minister.
I was.
Distant days gone.
Not that long ago, but yes. This is absolutely a sea change. We've had the legal eagles desperately trying to get a way through the... It's a complete jungle of laws and covenants and everything else. We've finally found the way through. So leaseholders will not have this doubling, tripling of ground rent anymore, which means that in 10 years, instead of paying £250 a year ground rent, you're paying something stupid like £800 a year. So people can't get mortgages, so that's going to change. That's going to be back down to a peppercorn ground rent. Changing the leases from an extension of 90 up to 990. In effect, it's a freeholder in all but name. So that's good as well. And the final thing, which is the absolute cherry on the cake, is that we're going to find it a way to make it much, much easier for the leaseholders to come together and actually just buy out the freehold.
But it's not, as Trish suggests, doing anything to solve the housing crisis, is it?
It's a different part of the housing crisis. These people are trapped. There's a few MPs who are in one-bedroom flats. They've got kids now. They can't sell them. I mean, there are people across the country. Funnily enough, the Northwest was one of the worst places for leaseholds because it was a historic thing that you would have a whole area where the houses were leasehold. Not just flats. I mean, it's the most bizarre thing. It's a complete minefield. It's taken the law commissioners all these years to get it sorted. We've finally now got the bills ready to go.
Right, let's keep answers brief on this and then we can fit in one more question. Matthew?
Well, briefly, I mean, yes, obviously... everything you said is absolutely right, and it's. I'm glad for leaseholders that they'll have this ability, and anything that encourages liquidity in the housing market is to be welcomed. But the truth of the matter is that the elephant in the room is that there is an inadequate supply of affordable housing, and particularly of affordable social housing. I'm in the build baby build camp. I don't care about what happens to second homeowners' views at all. I think one of the revolutions just waiting to happen is a housing revolution where huge numbers of homes will be built for young people to get onto the property ladder. And if we don't, we're risking a serious generational crisis of people who are still living with their parents when they're 40.
Barry?
The problem is that people are trapped in their homes and that the developers are building properties not now to make the profit from the sale of those properties, but to make the profit from the service charges. Yeah. This bill does nothing to impact service charges. This bill does nothing to actually end leasehold. Every other country in the world does not have a residential leasehold system. They have a common hold, a strata title, all around the globe. They have a different system where the residents own their apartment, but also a common part shared between all the residents. They then control who manages the block. At the moment in the UK, if you are a leaseholder, somebody can tell you you've got to paint your outside of the building this colour, you've got to do your roof even though it doesn't, redo your roof even though it doesn't need it. They're ripping people off for the insurance. It's a rip-off, and this bill doesn't go nearly far enough.
Angela?
Very quickly, we need to build more affordable housing for young people. I've got 2 young marrieds who are looking to buy. It's really, really impossible, even on decent incomes. homes. And we also need to encourage home ownership. As Mrs Thatcher, she wanted to create a property-owning democracy. You feel safe, you feel secure, and you feel happy when you have your own home and you have something to give to your children, and we have to find a way to encourage that to happen.
Right, Roger in Taunton says, Boris Johnson wanted to be injected with COVID live on TV to show it wasn't dangerous. In hindsight, was his handling of the virus really any better than Trump's? Now, Johnson's former Chief of Staff, Eddie Lister, has told the COVID inquiry that the then Prime Minister, quote, suggested to senior civil servants and advisers that he wanted to be injected with COVID-19 on television to demonstrate to the public that it did not pose a threat. He also said that Boris Johnson did say he would rather let the bodies pile high than impose a second lockdown in the autumn of 2020. We've probably got 1 minute for each of you, so please do keep brief. Barry.
What the inquiry into the COVID period has shown is not just that some people said some pretty obnoxious things about each other. It's shown that there was complete dysfunctionality at the heart of government at a time when the public needed them to focus. It will be a huge stain on that administration for a very long time.
Heather.
Well, my last job in government was with the Cabinet Office, where we set up the inquiry with Madam Hallett, and she, I hope, will be moving the conversation on to how do we stop this ever happening again. Let's sort our preparedness out. All of this is chaff. None of this stuff. It's pure tittle-tattle. And people love navel-gazing, don't they?
No, it's not.
But
No, Heather,
really
died.
No,
Thousands
absolutely.
died.
But
it's not mere tittle-tattle. It's not chaff.
People swearing at each other. Come on.
No.
We ought to be talking about how do we make sure this doesn't happen again. That's what we ought to be talking about in the inquiry.
Well, maybe by not having people who govern on WhatsApp as a kick-off. I mean, that would be a really good start. Yeah. I mean, on the question, he did. He didn't have to inject it, but he got it, didn't he? And it nearly killed him.
Very early on.
Whatever one thinks about Boris Johnson, it was a terrible time, that, because no one wanted him to die, and it would really have been a terrible day for this country. And the fact that he said that is deplorable, I think. It really is. It's regrettable and awful.
I can remember the night that he was taken into hospital. I was on air, and I mean, just announcing it was quite a thing.
It really
Prime
was
Minister
close.
going into effectively intensive care. Angela.
Boris Johnson is not a natural interventionist. He wanted us to have a good time, and therefore I think he didn't really absorb and understand, well, it was an unprecedented crisis, what COVID was all about. I was one of those naysayers too. I remember joking, I'm going to curtsy to people instead of shake their hands. We didn't really understand what was coming. Yes, government, I would have thought any government would have some kind of protocol in place for a potential pandemic. I hope, all the bitching aside that's going on in the COVID inquiry and some very regrettable things that have been said, albeit in the privacy of WhatsApp, I want to know, did we lock down too soon, too late, and how do we ensure that we don't get into that horrible situation again?
Right, our final question from Nikki in Kent. Taylor Swift fans, she's a popular music singer, Barry. Taylor Swift fans in Argentina have been camping in tents outside the stadium she's going to perform in for 5 months.
Taylor Swift?
5 months. Who would you camp outside for that long to see? Heather.
Muhammad Ali at his prime. What a mover. What an incredible guy.
Barry.
I've been camping out for the past 13 years to get a Labour government.
That's not what I thought you were going to say.
What's coming out?
I'd rather see Taylor Swift as Prime Minister.
Matthew.
Well, I think, and I emphasise that if I did camp, it would be a lifestyle choice. But I think, true to my centrist dad origins, the Oasis reunion that we people of my generation and sensibility long for. So I'd be in my tent right now.
Yeah, I mean, I do love Oasis, but they were the musical shoplifters of the Beatles, really, weren't they?
They were, yes.
And if there was anybody I would, even though they were way before my time, I would say that just to hear Paul McCartney when he was still in full voice, I've been to see him 8 times, but the last time the voice wasn't as great, although the music is so wonderful, and I would still camp out to see Mac.
Well, you can camp out to see me at the Hammersmith Apollo this weekend,
with
Friday, Saturday and Sunday.
Better get down there now, hadn't we?
Even better,
yeah.
Cliff Richard.
No way.
Yep.
Cliff Richard.
No
So
way. I love Cliff.
Is he still alive?
Yes, fantastic.
He's 83 and he's doing
Never better.
6 concerts concerts.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be, as part of the concert, I'm going to be interviewing him on stage.
Are you going to be
Fantastic.
dancing as well?
I won't be dancing.
Oh, okay.
With your bad knee? Oh.
With my bad knee. No, no one wants
Do you
to
need a
see
helper?
that.
It's so funny how you don't talk anymore.
Very good, very good. I'll be
Bachelor
but
boy.
I will be wired for sound, but not wearing roller
Time for a summer
skates.
holiday,
Right,
maybe.
tomorrow's panel: Labour's leader in the House of Lords, Baroness Angela Smith, the Conservative MP David Simmons, Nadine. No, not that one. Nadine Batchelor-Hunt, the Politics Home journalist and the editor-in-chief of the website Unheard, Freddie Sayers. Thank you to Angela, to Matthew, to Heather and to Barry for joining us tonight. Now, in a moment, we are going to talk about one of the bits of legislation that wasn't included in the Queen's speech, banning conversion therapy. Now, we have talked about this on the programme before, and I think a lot of people are quite confused about what conversion therapy actually means. It essentially means that someone goes to see someone to effectively pray the gay away. I think that's the phrase that's used. It doesn't work. It can't work. And yet the government still seems reluctant to ban it. Why is that? Because it is banned in quite a lot of other countries, so it's quite possible to do. But they say, it's all very, very difficult, and they keep delaying it. Do you think that conversion therapy should be banned? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the head of Britain's biggest police force says his officers will do everything in their power to make sure armistice and remembrance events are not disrupted by